Hey guys, Thomas Genie here, aka Mustached, and I'm here to review the movie The Missing Link. So, before I begin my review, it is interesting to see the people, I believe this is from the people behind Kubo and the Two Strings, and I will talk about that at the end of the review and a quick comparison, but nonetheless, let us get into it. So, this movie starts off with two men on a boat. We meet Mr. Frost and his partner there. I believe his name is Lint. As they come across as they are fishing the Loch Ness Monster. So, Frost wants to go ahead and take a picture as Mr. Lint is trying to hold down the beast, but it bashes them back onto the surface and breaks the camera in the process. So after this little venture, Mr. Lint wants to leave and does so. Meanwhile, Frost wants to continue to gather evidence so he can make his way and be a part of this association of other men who have scholared and found their way and found various other things. And he says that he has evidence for finding what is referred to as Sasquatch, or Bigfoot, or, various other names you could think of, and they actually make a little bit out of that as well. Nonetheless, he moves into this building, this facility where he meets these other scholarly men, and he tells them that he will have his proof. And the leader of this group, I forget what his name is, so I'll just call him the main villain of the movie, since that's essentially what he does end up becoming. He essentially makes this deal, if Frost can find it, then he will be, be a part, and if not, then it'll be the whole humiliation, and you didn't get to join either, and all that stuff. I'm just waiting for the lag to stop on my video. If I had two laptops, this wouldn't be an issue anymore, but I don't, and I can't afford one. Patreon support would really help with that, though. Anyway, so, nonetheless, Frost starts to move on, and the leader, the main villain, hires this thug named Stink, or his last name is Stink. Meanwhile, Frost is following this route to where he's had this sort of lead. He got this paper talking about the Sasquatch, which is where he got the idea. So he makes his way into the forest, and the main villain is sort of like peeking and keeping an eye at a distance. So he sees this giant figure after some wandering in the forest, and he does eventually meet with the missing Link, or just, as he eventually refers to him later on in the movie, Link. So he tells him, Link, that he wants to help him, and then Link talks about how he has potential cousins of sorts, referring to the Yetis, which are the more northern version that would live in the snow. So they do indeed make that deal. So they travel to a pub where he's trying to gather some more information, and this is where he first encounters Stink, the assassin. So the two have a little gun out and or a little fight there, and the Link is just kind of standing there, and Frost is doing the majority of the work until like the end. So Stink makes his exit after the scuffle, and Frost tries or attempts to follow over. And from there, they try to flee, so they head for the train. So Frost, as they're making their way there, comes across this woman, his old love interest, his ex, Adelina, or I'll just call her Ada for short. So there's a little bit of kind of flirting tension between the two, as you can would you imagine there is some sort of building up to that, but it never resolves in an actual kiss. But nonetheless, as they bid farewell, Link uh, that wants to make his way in, so he tries to use, or I should say, Frost uses Link to try to get him over this wall, and he gets him over, or he gets him through the wall instead. So they are trying to essentially take Ada's vault to get this map that will lead them to the northern area where they assume where the Yeti are. But Ada sees what they are doing, tries to stop them. Um, Again, pulling a gun out. There's a lot of gun pulling out. And as they are fleeing from her, they actually run into Stink again, and then she kind of joins them, kind of like, oh, it's like, I'm the only one who should be chasing you, god damn it. And they're near the train station, and they fake out getting into the train station as Stink goes on, and they fake him out, essentially. So she's kind of telling, she kind of eases into the whole Link as a, one of these, like, this sort of creature. She sort of just goes, oh yeah, I'll help you. So there's a little bit of rushing at this point of the movie. Meanwhile, they move on to New York. So while they're there, they move on to a boat where there's more flirting between Frost and Ada, and she's trying to push him toward Link, and then the two of them have a talk where he wants to have his own name, so he refers to himself, from at least in this one instance, as Susan, because he had met one lady earlier on, according to a story, named Susan, that didn't freak out when he saw this woman. So that's what he wanted to be referred to as. But to keep things a little bit consistent for this review, I'll just keep referring to him for the moment as Link. It's a little bit easier. So I'm not switching back and forth, which is actually something Frost does later on in the movie, by the way. So I don't know if that was a continuity mistake, or if he's just sort of still in the jerk mode or whatever, but nonetheless, Stink is also somehow gets there and holds up Ada, and she like starts to fight him off, and then she falls over the boat, and then Link goes to save her, and then Stink continues to try to mainly assault Frost with his gun. So Link does go to save Ada, and then Stink kind of runs back into them as they're sort of running through the boat. So he has these other men sort of give way, kind of tricking them. They do this pretty neat thing where they're on the boat and it's like curving up one of the waves, and like they start like to turn with the thing. So it's a pretty action-packed scene. But eventually they get out of there. They get in a much smaller boat, in which then it does a bit of a travel skip to where they are now in India. And it shows as they pass by that Stink once again is not that far behind. So they eventually meet with this woman as they are moving closer to, I believe it's like pretty close to their destination. They meet with this woman named Momo, and they have like a little moment with her, and she lends them like her granddaughter to essentially be their guide. And Stink is arriving there with the main villain and his little lackey guy that he's sort of mainly talking to throughout the movie during their little moments. So the team of Link, Ada, and Frost continue to climb, and they make across the Yetis. However, as soon as that happens, the Yetis hold spears up against them. So they're all forced into this ice temple, where they meet the leader, who tells them that they essentially are not allowed to leave, because they want their location to remain secret, so they throw the three of them into a pit. So Frost finally lets it all out, still complaining at this very moment about his dreams, and Link's dreams are also been crushed simultaneously. And Ada sort of picks up the slack at this moment, and I will admit that there is one part of this I do not agree with, but for the most part she is right. She mainly says, she gets on Frost's case about, chasing a dumb dream about these guys that he shouldn't even be associated with. And the part I don't agree with is that she does compare it to Link's dream, and I don't think that's fair, because although his dream ended up being meeting the Yeti, and then the Yeti also being jerks, the problem with that to me is that happens so much later in the movie that the link to me just doesn't fit, because we as the audience knew for a much longer period of time that Frost's men were the men that he was trying to join were jerks, and then they were trying to do all this other stuff. We see all of that for like a good chunk of the film, but we spend such a little month of time in comparison to meeting the Yetis and finding out that they're jerks. And the other issue I have with it is what their actual desire is, and again, that's why the comparison to me doesn't fit, is for Frost, it kind of is about belonging, but it not really. It kind of is, but the bigger part is that he wants to show off, whereas Link actually wants to belong. That is his actual goal. He wants to find a place where he can be with his family. That is the character that we see from the beginning. That is what is consistent. But for Frost, again, while he does technically kind of want to belong, again, it's more about showing off to him. It's about being right. It's not about fitting in. So while they do have a connection in one part, it doesn't fit in the other, which again is why I do feel like that scene is a little bit unfair to Link. But it does eventually pass, and he does throw up out of the pit Ada to get her out so that she can get something to help them get out. But as they are making their exits, they bump into, at the other side of the this ice bridge, the three men, the main villain, Stink, and the other henchman guy. And the main villain kind of goes nuts, saying like, "Oh, we can't make such an advanced, link between what we have and the sort of development. It's just not fair," stuff like that. So he's like cracking at the ice with his little ice pick. The two other guys like back away, and the other three try to get across, but they end up like falling with him, but they were already attached via rope, so now that they're like hanging, it eventually comes down to Link to save the three of them as they're like hanging off of this like smaller ice pick. But he eventually gets them, climbs them all three of them up. And the other guy ends up like falling, and then Stink ends up also like falling to his death. So, afterwards, after they leave, the other guy just left, by the way, the little henchman guy. So, as they make their way back, Frost teams up with Link to go on further adventures. Ada does her little romance, not romance thing, not giving that kiss at the end. And then Frost talks about to Link about meeting up to go on a new adventure to go apparently find Atlantis. And that was Missing Link. And it was a pretty solid movie. Again, nearing the end, that was probably my most major issue, was that whole comparison thing. I think that was a bit unfair to Link as a character. But besides that, it was pretty smooth of a story. It was a bit of an adventure story. Um, you can kind of see Frost slowly but surely, like little ticks of him breaking down, and then finally that full, like, blast. Again, it all happens in one scene, and again, while that comparison is fair, it is also something that part that Frost needed to hear, at least that part about him, specifically. Um, so I think a little bit of rewriting on that sequence would have helped that little section, but for the most part, it all kind of leads up to that scene, because that's sort of where the crux of every shift of the movie happens. Um, and again, most of it's, again, just going from location to location, seeing the villains sort of flop and go blimp and whatever. And I did mention, I'd say a little bit about a comparison to Kubo, and I will say that as far as a story goes from beginning to end, and even how this movie was promoted in comparison to Kubo, I think Kubo did a much better job at doing both of these things, both promoting itself, because the only reason I even know Missing Link is even a thing is because I saw other reviewers reviewing it. I did not see any trailers for it anywhere. I saw trailers for Kubo, so that did more of a job as far as I'm aware of doing promotional work. And as far as the story is concerned, I think Kubo is a much stronger story. I don't remember what I gave it, but I think I gave it either an 8 or a 9 out of 10. And if I didn't, I definitely would bump it up to that score, because Kubo and the Two Strings is a phenomenal movie. Whereas I think this one's a little bit just, it's a solid movie. And again, it just has that one big bump that I think kind of slides it down from a 7 to a 6. And changing that crucial moment, because it really is crucial, definitely would have made it a more solid 7 out of 10 for me. Um, and, whether or not they continue on, I wouldn't mind seeing more from this crew in this regard if they decide to do, like, a Link Part 2 or whatever, or another story. These guys have been really phenomenal in doing stock animation. It is something that you don't see that very often, and it seems like this group, again, is the one that is consistently pushing for it to, like, keep coming back. So it is still interesting to see it come about. And again, I do think that out of the two movies, at least from a comparison standpoint, Kubo just absolutely blasts this movie out of the water in terms of both promotion and story, and even character. But that is my review for The Missing Link. It's an okay movie. But if you did enjoy this review, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, make sure to check out those links in the description. They will head you over to first to my Discord server, and the second to my Patreon page. Any donations are greatly appreciated. And until next time, everyone, bye-bye.